Hi everybody, welcome back to Snowflake Summit 2025. This is our wrap-up session. Myself, Dave Vellante, with George Gilbert. Rebecca Knight has gone wall to wall, so we're giving her a little break. George, excited to wrap up. Let me just get into it. I'm going to summarize what we're going to talk about. I mean, we said this, we saw it in the keynotes. These guys are really doubling down on simplicity. We saw that in the analyst session. Benoit made that big point. They're going after the data science persona and the data engineering workloads. We're going to talk about that and their cost competitiveness, the way they've addressed that. But there's a number of open issues that you and I were just talking about that we want to get to. The way in which they're focusing on, talk to the data through natural language. That has implications to the business intelligence layer. There's some new emerging companies that we want to call out. Price performance is always an issue. So we'll sort of dig into that a little bit, specifically around Iceberg and the workloads, which are primarily analytic today, but they're going after that data engineering workload, and that's why things like OpenFlow and Gen 2 and adaptive compute are so important, and we'll tie that up to a vision. So let's start, George, with the emphasis on and recommitment to simplicity. That is one of the first principles at Snowflake that Benoit and Thierry started the company on, built the company on, and they're going deeper into that simplicity, bringing that playbook to AI. Your thoughts?
So, it's pervasive simplicity, as you were saying, and the agentic technology that's being applied to each persona radically up-levels that and makes a difference. And then in the context of the governed platform, it means that when you're getting data from one persona to the next, you understand its lineage, its provenance, and you can trust it. So simplicity, trust is the core. And let's go persona by persona, and then we'll go into some of the issues. So the business user, this is now not the data analyst or business analyst, but the end user who can now talk to the data. That's Sridhar's tentpole issue.
That's what Rebecca said. The only development language the only programming language I know is English.
And Andre Karpathy, one of the giants of AI, is like the hottest new programming language is English. So yes, but there's some issues because you can ask a question in English, and you can get back in essentially a limited visualization or a table, in the form of an answer. And we'll explain now in a minute where that collides with some other issues. So that's Snowflake Intelligence, and that behind that is supported by Cortex Analyst, Cortex Search. Cortex Analyst is for the structured data.
Let me stop you. Explain Snowflake Intelligence, because there's some confusion around that.
Snowflake Intelligence is like the user interface to be able to talk to the data, the primary user interface, whether it's structured or unstructured, and underneath the covers, it calls on Cortex Analyst, Cortex Search. So it's Yes. And the fact that it call it Snowflake Intelligence hints at that it's business intelligence.
Does it work better than Apple Intelligence? We don't know yet.
Yeah. Well, Apple Intelligence trying to bite off a bigger problem, and they have issues with that.
Yeah. Well.
So for the data analyst, they're working directly at Cortex Analyst, structured data. The data scientist, that was Snowpark. That was the big innovation where they have, Python and Java. So those are the procedural languages that a data scientist wants to work with. And by having essentially a data frame interface, that's where the data scientist is comfortable munging data procedurally, not in SQL.
But the Snowflake peeps are SQL peeps.
Yes, but now they can appeal to the Python peeps. And there are two ways of doing that. They bought actually something that we previewed before they bought it, was a company called Ponder, which gave them a data frame, which is the core data structure that a Python programmer works with, as opposed to SQL. The data frame's different. And Python Modem gave them Pandas, which is that core data frame, but running on a cluster, because Python just runs on a single process, so just your laptop. So now they could take it to the entire cluster, and in a compatible way, more compatible than even Databricks with Spark can take from the laptop to the Spark cluster. But they're going to add compatibility, Spark compatibility as well. But they're going to add an agent on top of that to help with the feature engineering, the building ML models.
A data science.
Yeah,
a data
science
agent.
persona,
Yeah,
right. That's not, I don't think that's there yet, but that's coming. And all of this then is built on the fact that, like with Cortex Analyst, you're getting a richer structuring of the data so that it's the semantic model, but it's not the full semantic model that we talk about with relational AI. This is just the metrics and dimensions. It's called dimensional semantics. These have been built in for years in the BI tools. They have their own semantic models for presenting metrics and dimensions in Power BI, in Looker, but now it's moving into the server. And the difference is when it's in the server, this is where Snowflake has a great advantage. As everyone uses that data, that semantic model learns more about the data and it grows organically. And so your coverage of the data then expands and then all tools can share it. That's the synergy.
So this semantic model, you said it's, okay, so it's what, a two-dimensional semantic model, not the four-dimensional?
2.5, yeah.
A 2 plus.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But not quite 3, and definitely not the 4, but on the road, if they so choose to go there.
Every persona now looks not at raw tables, but they can look at something up-leveled. That's the synergy. The other governance, the permissions across personas is synergy.
Is it like, is it an analogy where, when I started years ago, when I learned coding, programming, it was called back then, it was COBOL and Assembler and Pascal and pretty low-level languages, and then you had object-oriented programming, and
you were higher and higher level.
Right.
This is the same thing. You're up-leveling the data to a higher level of abstraction. It's not. It's moving from strings to things. That's the 2+ dimension. What we talk about with the 4D map is people, places, things, and activities. Mm-hmm. That's the 4D map.
Like processes is an example. Okay.
Yes. So that's the synergy, the governance, simplicity, wrapping it all together. Huge progress. It all comes together this year. The other issue was that we identified a couple years ago cost competitiveness on the data engineering persona, because these are often batch workloads.
Well, let me set that up, because you uncovered here, speaking to a number of customers, that they were moving their data engineering workloads outside of Snowflake, putting them into some Spark execution engine or other environment, likely Databricks or maybe EMR in AWS. And there was either real or perceived a TCO problem.
Right.
And we used to question, well, Snowflake bundles in the hardware, but it was we talked to enough customers to know it was a problem. They've addressed that in a couple of ways.
Right.
One being new pricing.
Yeah.
And also some feature capabilities that appeal to.
Yes, you hit on both, which is there's a pricing, a new price where if you have less performance sensitive workload, you can schedule it and then Snowflake will figure out when best to run it. So they get differential pricing.
Which is a pricing tier that you suggested like 3 years ago. You remember?
I vaguely, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So
I remember it well. I mean, you said, this is an easy problem to solve. They just got to reprice it.
Yeah,
but they had to do other product capabilities as well.
Yes, they had to do some engineering to do that.
So to their credit, they didn't just reprice it, they did the work.
But also the Gen 2 warehouse and adaptive computer, adaptive warehouse. Now I'm not 100% sure, I believe they're two separate things. I think one is, with the Gen 2 warehouse, you still have to specify what instance size or cluster size, and then adaptive warehouse, I believe, is when it's all hidden from you, and it figures out, essentially, it looks serverless.
But I mean, eventually those two worlds have to come together, don't they?
You would think so.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a legacy thing to give people control where they need it with the Gen 2. But the point is, what Christian emphasized to us was that those were optimized to be much more performant on write-sensitive workloads, meaning the data engineering one. And the reason this is so important is that that's the early part of the data lifecycle, and you need the early part of the data lifecycle to understand where the data is coming from, to understand its lineage, its quality, so that the downstream analytics can trust it.
Just to clarify, so Snowflake basically admitted itself that we used to not really pay attention to the data until it was inside of Snowflake, or they pay attention to how to get it into Snowflake, not when the data was created. So now they're thinking about the full life cycle of the data, from creation to presumably deletion.
Well, to be fair, they had the same engine and the same pricing doing all those workloads. And DBT like sort of revolutionized data engineering because they made it simple. They brought software development lifecycle techniques to data engineering. But now they have differential pricing for that, and they optimize the engine to do those workloads
for different
better.
workloads, horses for courses, as Floyer would say.
And that was important for the governance story. It was critical for the governance story.
Tie it to governance, I don't understand.
Because you need to know where the data has come from.
Right, the lineage.
You need to touch it.
Yep.
And that was also why they bought Datavolo to start with the connectors.
Without that full life cycle, they've got blind spots.
Right.
They can only give the lineage for when it lands into Snowflake.
Right.
And that is a fundamental flaw well, I said fundamental flaw. It lowers the value of your governance.
There's ways of getting lineage from other tools. There's a standard called Open Lineage. I don't know if it's column level and that sort of thing, but they're trying to give you soup to nuts control. And if they manage the whole life cycle, they'll have richer information about it and richer governance.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, great.
So, but there's still some open issues that we've talked about before. One of them is this whole talk to your data. It raises the question, are you guys really trying to disintermediate the business intelligence tools? Like, they have their own semantic models, as we said, but they are islands. Their semantic models are tied to their tools, and they're basically scoped to the data that's being presented in those tools. So what you want is the semantic models that are in the BI tools to migrate to the database, and you want those tools then to use the shared semantic model that Snowflake is building. And that seems to be in progress. I think Sigma is doing that, and they import the Looker semantic model. In fact, that was one of the first tool, I think, that had a server-based semantic model. But the idea is you bring these in, and then there's this sort of feedback cycle where the more these are used and the more personas work with the data, an administrator can build out this semantic model so it's richer than any one BI tool would ever be.
So you're saying a server-based semantic model as opposed to what, a client-based semantic model, which is no
it's like a BI tool would have either in the client or in its own application server. Looker was the first one that put one in the server, but it was only
in database.
But it was only for Looker, for the Looker client. The idea is now this is a shared service
that is tightly tied to the database.
Yes.
Okay.
And that all tools then can depend on. We're in that progress. But the reason this is an open issue is then the BI tools need to adopt this shared semantic layer. But then you ask, so why would an end user interact with Snowflake Intelligence, to interact with and visualize data when you have, for instance, you might have Power BI and Tableau have their own talk to your data, and if they now have shared semantic layers, then you can start to get the best of both worlds. Or even newer tools, Hex and Sigma, where the data producers, the analytic producer and consumer are more collaborative, where these the dashboards are essentially, the visualizations are more interactive. You have widgets, you have rich visualizations, you can navigate through the data with the visualization. That's not something that Snowflake can really do yet.
But who enabled, when you started the talk, I was envisioning stovepipes of viz.
That's what they were.
Okay, and you're saying,
but what happens is we're moving towards that. We're not there yet.
But who is? The hexes and the sigmas?
Yes.
Or Snowflake? Snowflake's enabling.
Snowflake enables it by having the semantic layer, but I think the interaction layer will belong to the hexes, the sigmas, and as Power BI and Tableau evolve.
It's a question you and I asked at our last breaking analysis with both Snowflake and Databricks. What about the visualization?
Right.
And this is what you're referring to.
Right,
And I think
exactly.
we're starting to get clarity that the visualization will likely be delivered with these modern third-party tools. You mentioned Hex, you mentioned Sigma. Where's ThoughtSpot in all this?
ThoughtSpot, I just saw, they were one of the first ones to have that English language interface to your data.
Years ago.
Yes, and ideally their semantic model would be a shared one. They would use like the Snowflake one, but again, they would be the interaction layer.
Yep.
So what happens is Snowflake wins because there's more data that's more accessible. It's up-leveled from assembly language beyond COBOL to, it's up-leveled. But then you have a rich ecosystem of tools that can look across all the data. You don't have the islands that are, by BI tool.
Yeah, data platform, data infrastructure, right? This appears to be how these guys are positioning.
Right. So, and then, we've talked about the price performance issue. We've talked about the governance issue.
We haven't talked about Iceberg.
What was interesting when we asked about Iceberg, well, one, we should emphasize again that last year, a principal competitor, made a big deal about their catalog being...
Yeah, Databricks, open source Unity.
Yeah,
they announced that it's open source. But
it's an aspiration. It's
but you know how Databricks works, is they basically build it in-house and then they announce, oh, it's open source. And that's not how open source typically works, as you know, right?
Well, and
open source is typically, hey, we have this idea, what do you think? Let's collaborate. It's not like, hey, we built this thing.
But as we know, the code, there was only a small fraction of the code was open source. It takes a lot of work.
Right.
So even though they did that dramatic, mic drop moment, they only open sourced, a fraction. But over time, it'll open up. But the reason I raised that is, so that was still a walled garden, but so people were trying to say Snowflake was a walled garden, but actually by having Horizon for all the rich governance and catalog within the Snowflake walled garden, then they have Polaris, which was the open source catalog for Iceberg, but then they synchronized permissions, and over time, ever richer levels of governance migrates to Polaris.
Like RBAC.
Yes. So the point is, it's not a walled garden. You get the richest performance when you're Snowflake native, but you also get governance, including read-write control, where any compute engine has read-write control to open the externally managed Iceberg, the Polaris managed. And it could be Glue, catalog from Amazon, as long as they follow the Polaris spec.
So they become the Switzerland of catalogs.
Yes. But you raised the point of, so what new workloads are getting applied to the Iceberg data? And it turns out analytics first. And that goes back to that issue where they have the world-beating analytic engine, but all the performance work and pricing work that they're doing can now maybe attract some of the data engineering workloads that may have been externally managed in Iceberg. That we'll have to see.
That's a revenue opportunity. That's
right.
That's new territory for these guys, and there seems to be some green shoots, to use that term, around that.
But the key point is, and as we started telling the story a year or two ago, which was, it's not how much data your DBMS controls, it's how much data you define and govern. So it's now no longer just Horizon, but Horizon plus Polaris next to Unity, which is in its way its own walled garden, and they're still working on merging the Iceberg and Delta formats, and there's work to do, we understand. It's not a layup. But the point is...
Well, I got some insight on that from the Iceberg community. Well, you were at the Iceberg Summit. Yeah. Again, it seems like the contributions that Databricks is making tend to be, is my understanding, very much, hey, we're going to develop this in-house, and then we're going to come to the community and say, hey, can we put this in? And my understanding is the original creators of Iceberg are very much community-driven. Yeah. And very collaborative. So I wonder what that dynamic is like. We're going to find out a little bit more
We'll find
next
out
week.
more next week.
Yeah.
And I want to get some more insight from the Iceberg guys, at Snowflake, what questions to ask there. But it's just because they bought Iceberg doesn't mean, oh, we've taken care of interoperability. It'll happen over time, but it is apparent that Iceberg is winning.
Well, Databricks has to make it happen, right? I mean, otherwise what's going to happen to Delta? And they've got customers that need a migration path.
The point is, it's a migration path. Yeah. It's not just turn the switch. And
whereas, in the case of Polaris and the Horizon function that's going into Polaris, it seems anyway that is more tuned to the open source ethos of, hey, this is a true open source. Polaris was open source.
Yeah.
And as we bring function in, we're going to bring it to the community. Hey, what do you think? Can you work on this? I'm not sure if that's the right way to frame it, but that's what I'm hearing.
Let's
of course,
put it
from this crowd.
In a bigger context. So we still have like Databricks as an island. It's a big island. Snowflake is an island. You have, Salesforce with the data cloud. It's an island. The point is, we have to bring all those islands together. Even the SAP data cloud, ServiceNow with their workflow data product, or data platform, or data fabric. I was talking to the CTO of Atlan, and what we really need is a layer across all these. It's something to harmonize them to get to the 4D map that you and I have been talking about, because the only way you can look 360 across your organization and have your agents act on your behalf with all the context is if you have that layer above all these islands.
You're jumping ahead to vision. I just want to close out on one of the other open items, which we were talking about Iceberg and the preponderance of workloads or workloads are analytic.
Yeah.
Data engineering is the opportunity, but your other point was that's why they need OpenFlow and Gen 2 and adaptive compute to go after those
the data engineering
workloads. Explain that in a little bit more detail. Why are OpenFlow, Gen 2, and adaptive compute so critical to go after those?
And the new pricing for less performance sensitive workloads, because in the data lifecycle, it's sort of like when you have a decision that's made or informed by an ML model or a dashboard that's telling you to informing a decision. One might make a decision, one might form a decision. You need to trust it, and to trust it, you need to know where the data came from. It's sort of like it's like the ingredients labels on your food packaging. You need to go all the way to the source.
So that's OpenFlow.
OpenFlow gets you the connectors.
Right, and then what about Gen 2?
Gen 2 and adaptive compute. They're optimized now for more write-intensive workloads, which is what the data engineering workloads are.
Got it.
So
okay.
they're
so that
and with
higher
the new
performance.
pricing.
Okay.
And the new pricing.
And the are the data engineering workloads less predictable? So you t-shirt sizes are less efficient, or
that's it's
certainly AI could be that. I mean, Jensen says we underestimated compute demand by 100x. So maybe AI is the other piece of why they need adaptive compute.
The data engineering workloads used to be scheduled. That was your batch window.
Yeah.
But now you want less and less latency between where you're capturing the data ultimately and how you're turning it into a decision.
The old batch window.
It's shrinking.
Yeah, right.
And like with declarative tables, it's becoming, and Snowpipe, much, much lower latency. So
all right, good. So now we got to wrap on vision. So you started to talk about the 4D map. Summarize where you see Snowflake's role there. Are they the data infrastructure that serves the 4D map, or do they become the 4D map?
Well, I go back to my favorite metaphor: is it dessert topping or floor wax? It's a change. It's a personality change. And they have to decide, do they want to grow up into that 4D map? Because if you, let me just take Salesforce as a counterexample. They don't really care about the data as much, and they use an open source query engine, same engine that Starburst uses.
They don't want to own that data layer is what you're saying.
They own the model.
Yeah.
And so the question for Snowflake is, and then you'll ask Christian, he's like, we peer with Snowflake Data Cloud, and half the data comes one way and half...
Salesforce Data Cloud.
Salesforce. Half the data comes one way, half the data goes the other way. But the point is, at some point, you're going to have other islands, the SAP data, island, ServiceNow.
Well, the other piece is, what can you do with that with each direction? Can you actually take action? Can you affect transactions?
You need to move up a layer to be the 360, the 4D map.
And in order to affect transactions.
Across, right. Because analytics and operationalizing decisions, they become more effective the greater the scope of your visibility.
And we think crunchy is not really the answer to that. It's basically a Unistore replacement.
Yes, but
and they'll probably kill the OLAP piece of it.
We're talking about something more strategic, which is, are you the infrastructure or are you the platform on which applications are built? To be the platform, you need that 4D map.
And that's what we believe Salesforce wants to be, that platform of the...
They want to be, right now they are for customer-centric data, for the customer journey and the customer 360.
They don't really, do they have the 4D map?
It's
evolving.
It's evolving, but it's more. They have more of it than a typical data platform.
Only because they have access to the process data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So the question then is, can someone else? Does Snowflake aspire with some additional technology to become the 4D map for the entire enterprise, or do they become the 2.5D map? Which is the dimensions and metrics, which is...
And let the ecosystem, I mean, generally our answer to that question has been the ecosystem picks up and delivers that value. That's been consistent from our early conversations with Benoit.
Right.
And we're certainly hearing that today. And that's not a bad business. It's maybe not as lucrative, I don't know.
The trick is, if you leave it completely to the ecosystem, then what does each member of the ecosystem bet on? They want to bet on the shared infrastructure, but if one other member of the ecosystem is building this 4D map, it's harder to get everyone else to agree on it.
Right, or that becomes a de facto standard, and sucks the value out of your,
yes,
the margins of your platform
because
are squeezed.
you lose feature
pricing
differentiation
power,
and pricing power.
Yeah.
So this again, it goes back to, this is going to be the most valuable piece of real estate in enterprise software for the next 10, 15 years.
That harmonization layer.
It almost trivializes it to say harmonization layer, because it's a digital twin of your business. The agents are not the super high value. The agents need that 4D map to learn how to operate.
Right, and well, we've defined two layers, what we call the harmonization layer where that 4D map lives, and the agent control framework that can interpret top-down metrics, that whole metrics tree that you talked about.
The metrics are derived from the 4D map.
Yes.
And then the agents use the metrics to learn how to operate.
We got to go.
Okay.
George, thank you. All right, and thank you for watching. This wraps up Snowflake Summit 2025, theCUBE's coverage. Go to thesiliconangle.com for all the news, thecuberesearch.com for all the deep dives, and of course, thecube.net, where you'll get all these videos on demand. And check out thecubeai.com. Ask it a question. It'll give you an answer. Thank you for watching. This is Dave Vellante for George Gilbert and Rebecca Knight, and we'll see you next time on theCUBE.